Star Wars Return of the Jedi turned 40 years old this year, the finale to one of the greatest film trilogies of all time, which leads to just one question. After 40 years, is Return of the Jedi still a good movie? Let's talk about that. Hey guys, I'm Karl, welcome to my movie film show. Feel free to subscribe down below if you would like to, but we're here today to talk about Star Wars Return of the Jedi. Jumping back in time all the way to 1983 for this one. Well, not really, you can watch it anytime you want. It's just come out in cinemas recently. You can watch it on Disney Plus anytime you want. As I mentioned, and as I'm sure a lot of you know, Return of the Jedi is the finale of what is, in my opinion, one of the greatest film trilogies of all time. Certainly one of the first film trilogies that sparked my love of movies. I remember when I was 7 years old, one weekend after the other, sitting down to watch the original trilogy one by one, falling ever more in love with Star Wars. And when I was a kid, Return of the Jedi was my favourite Star Wars movie. It's got Ewoks, and it's got a green lightsaber for Luke. I was only 7, you know, give me a break. And we'll get on to Ewoks later on, because that's a point of controversy within Star Wars in itself for some very strange people. Now, sometimes when movies are 40 years old, they don't hold up. And of course, one problem Star Wars has is nobody could have ever fathomed how far computers would come, how far technology would come. Even at this very moment, the technology that's being developed right now, all the AI stuff that's coming out, it's absolutely insane some of the stuff this AI stuff can do. It's taking technology to a whole new level. And in Star Wars, they never could have done it. So you see on their spaceships, they've got like 80 style computers, even still more recent ones, because they have to keep that aesthetic. Although I did find it weird in Andor when they had like a TV in a woman's apartment, because they'd never had that before. It's kind of weird. It opens a whole can of worms. We're not talking about Andor right now. Now, of course, Return of the Jedi has gone through many changes down the years, including some rather odd CGI scenes added in. Like in Jabba's palace, there's like a singing scene with the CGI woman alien. Ignoring that, there's a lot of really cool creatures within Star Wars, and Jabba himself is perhaps one of the most important in Star Wars. In fact, Jabba the Hutt might be one of the best creature creations in all of Star Wars. Sure, he's just a big giant slug, a big giant puppet. But for the most part, in most sci-fi movies, a big problem is that the alien creation, it's so simplified. Sure, they have weird faces or elongated features. For the most part, most alien creatures are bipedal. 2 legs, 2 arms, a head. There you go. Sometimes you get one with 2 heads just because creativity is lacking sometimes in Hollywood. But Jabba at least was something completely different. And a lot of the creatures within Star Wars were quite unique, but they are quite, you know, as I say, 2 legs, 2 arms, 1 head, funny face. But the opening to Return of the Jedi is fantastic because there's so much happening within it. Of course, Han has been frozen in carbonite and Empire Strikes Back, spoiler alert, and the whole team are trying to get him free. So Luke sends the droids to make an offer to Jabba, he declines it. Leia breaks in, we later on find out Leia breaks in. When Leia breaks in and she's got the helmet on, the voice changer, it's actually really cool because the first time you see that, you're like, who is that? It could be anybody.
Who are you?
Someone who loves you.
And when she frees Han and then ultimately they're caught, it's a really good twist. It's a really good unexpected twist at the beginning. And then even when they're captured, Luke has to go to Jabba's palace and try to free them, and it doesn't work out for him. You get to see the Rancor monster, Luke against the Rancor monster, which is a really cool scene in itself. But also you really get to see how villainous Jabba the Hutt is. Perhaps Jabba the Hutt is the biggest villain in Star Wars. Although I have made a video about the true villain of Star Wars once before on the channel, but I genuinely mean it, not just as a joke this time. Jabba the Hutt could be the most evil person, evil creature in Star Wars. Just look at what he does in the opening 10, 15, 20 minutes of Return of the Jedi. There's a Twi'lek girl dancing and he starts pulling her towards her, and when she starts to reject his advances, she sends him down to the Rancor to be killed. Anyone who defies him is either killed or maimed or eaten by Jabba himself. And then when Leia tries to free Han, she's ultimately captured. Han is thrown in a cell, but Leia is the one who's humiliated by Jabba, forced to wear the metal bikini, put on a collar and chain, and is constantly choked throughout that scene. Right in front of everybody in the whole cantina, everybody laughing at her, staring at her. That's one of the most villainous things in all of Star Wars, because putting someone to death is one thing, completely humiliating them is a whole other thing, especially when they're royalty. Similar to the shame scene in Game of Thrones. But of course we get that really cool scene then following on with the Sarlacc pit, and that was a really cool scene initially, perhaps died down a little bit by the fact that we know Boba survives now. Again, spoiler alert. So perhaps 40 years later, that's one scene within the movie which is massively being declined a little bit in its quality because we know Boba survives. Of course, with the advancements in HD and 4K and soon to be 8K, some of the special effects, in particular the practical effects within Star Wars, they look a bit dodgy, but that's not just in Return of the Jedi. For example, in Empire Strikes Back, there's a scene where Luke is flying in hot. On his strap, on his shoulders, just bubble wrap on it. Because small little things like that you can pick up clearer now because the image quality is clearer in itself. But that's the case with all movies down the years. Some little things that they used to get away with because the quality wasn't as clear on screen, they don't get away with anymore. But the whole opening of the movie with Jabba and trying to free Han and then trying to free themselves and the whole battle out at the Sarlacc pit, that's a really cool opening to a movie. So much happens to keep your attention. The pacing is fantastic. There's constantly something happening. Rancor monsters in there and everything. Some of the visuals from a sci-fi perspective were phenomenal, and it's stuff that we've never seen in Star Wars before. And that's the thing with Return of the Jedi. There's so much happens within this movie, because as I mentioned, we got all that stuff at the start, but then the Rebel Alliance get all their information about the new Death Star and how it's not operational, and it's the perfect time to attack, and that sets in motion a whole chain of events where they have to go to Endor. They end up on the forest moon of Endor to try take down the shield, but Luke's also going off to face Vader, and there's so many elements playing off each other, and it's really well done. Of course, the Puppet Master's in there in the form of the Emperor, controlling all the strings, or so he thinks. But there's one thing the Emperor couldn't count on: the impact of the Ewoks. Because here's the thing, Ewoks, I've mentioned this in a video before about Star Wars. Some people out there's a certain age group, I think there's like an age limit, and they hate Return of the Jedi because of Ewoks. I never understood this in my life. Mainly because, as I mentioned, when I was 7, Ewoks were the coolest thing I'd ever seen. I never understood how anyone can't like Ewoks. They're badass little bear-like creatures that prove size is no obstacle. But I guess people are going, oh, these little tiny bear creatures that don't have technology are beating the Empire. Well, yeah, they had bigger numbers, they had better knowledge of their home planet, or their home moon. Of course they're going to know better than an invading army. And when you throw a Jedi Knight into the mix, who's guiding them and helping them along the way, of course they're going to get the upper hand. And the funny thing is with the Ewoks, initially they were going to be Wookiees, but for budgetary reasons and time reasons, the costume department made smaller costumes and they just made the Ewoks. But they initially were going to be Wookiees. That's why in Revenge of the Sith we get whole Wookiee scenes, a lot more Wookiees in it, because that was the original plan for Return of the Jedi, which in itself was initially titled Revenge of the Jedi. But yeah, Ewoks are cool. I don't get what people don't like about them. If you don't like Ewoks, if it's one of the reasons you don't like Return of the Jedi, let me know all about it in the comment section below, because I'd love to know your crazy reasoning for it. Yep, nutbag. Further on from that, or perhaps around the same time as that, within Star Wars Return of the Jedi, we get one of the most iconic lines in all of Star Wars. It's a trap! Battle in space is going crazy. Nothing's going right for the rebels. It looks like the Empire are going to win again. And think about the first time you watch Star Wars. It's fully possible that the Empire could win, because they'd just done it in the last move. Nobody expected the first time they watched Empire Strikes Back that the bad guys would win, because that doesn't happen in movies. But then we're faced with a position in Return of the Jedi where everything's gone wrong for the rebels. And now this happens in a lot of movies, the all is lost moment. Everything goes wrong for the rebels, and because of that doubt, because of what happened in Empire Strikes Back, there is a possibility that in Return of the Jedi, the dark side could just win. They do such a good job in Return of the Jedi of making you actually believe it's possible. Because what we've seen from Darth Vader in the past is that he's pretty ruthless. In some of the more recent stuff, more recent Star Wars, he's even more ruthless. That's a whole different conversation for a different day. But in the first two movies, they do a really good job of establishing Vader as a monster villain, as one of the best villains of all time. So the idea of him turning and going to the good side, to the light side, they put enough doubt in there to make you think it wasn't going to happen, that the dark side were going to win. And then of course you got the end battle between Luke and Vader. It's pretty cool. Is it one of the best lightsaber fights in Star Wars? Perhaps not, but it's still a damn good fight. Maybe if you've watched Star Wars Return of the Jedi 400 times like a lot of us have, you know what's going to happen, and maybe so the quality of the movie goes down a little bit because you know what's coming. But I always try to judge movies on the first time you've watched them, the impact it's going to have on audiences in the future when they watch them for the first time. Return of the Jedi doesn't lose any of that impact. If you start off your Star Wars journey from episode 4, watch through to episode 6, I still think you're going to be blown away by it even all this time later. The visual effects have something left to be desired, especially some of the CGI that George Lucas threw in down the years, which is completely unnecessary. Definitely skipped over some bits here. But the weird one, the really weird one at the end of Return of the Jedi is the inclusion of Hayden Christensen at the end. This is a more recent addition to Return of the Jedi. I say recent, it's like 10-15 years ago they did it. It's really weird Hayden Christensen pops up at the end, only because Alec Guinness also pops up at the end. And sure, having Hayden Christensen there makes sense because we've seen his journey now, but why wouldn't it be Ewan McGregor? I guess you could make the claim that Luke didn't know the Ewan McGregor version of Obi-Wan, but he also didn't know the Hayden Christensen version of Anakin Skywalker or Darth Vader. So having that crossover is kind of odd. Why would Force Anakin choose to be young, but force Obi-Wan Kenobi would choose to be the old version of himself. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But that's a minor thing within Star Wars. Personally, I just watched Return of the Jedi a couple of days ago, and it still blew me away. I still loved it. The pacing is fantastic. The movie's a little bit over 2 hours. You could claim they cut off like 15 minutes out of the movie, but for the most part, there's so much happening, there's so many cool shots in it, and there's so much action in there. But overall, Return of the Jedi is just a solid movie. It's definitely in the top 4 Star Wars movies, and that's only because Rogue One was fantastic and possibly pushes into the top 3. The prequels are pretty good, and the sequels don't exist as far as I'm concerned. Star Wars Return of the Jedi, it's still a damn good movie in my opinion. But I'd love to know your opinions on Star Wars Return of the Jedi. Where does it rank in all of the Star Wars movies? And if you put Last Jedi ahead of Return of the Jedi, just get out. Just get out. And if you haven't got out, check out this video over here, and I'll catch you in the next video.